The world-traveled son of an Air Force tech sergeant, Kenneth Calhoun spent his formative years wherever the military sent his family, which included a stint at Wheelus Air Force Base in Tripoli, Libya, where he got a front-row seat for the outbreak of the Six-Day War, one of the many conflicts that compile the Arab-Israeli wars.
We lived on the economy, or downtown. We were there in June of 1967 when the Arab-Israeli war broke out. Now, I was not in school yet, but my brother and sister were, and I remember very well. They stayed on base that night that things really got scary. I think it was early June, around the 5th. And I stayed with my parents in downtown. Only time I ever remember seeing my dad with a service pistol, and he slept with it. They tried to keep me occupied. I got my birthday presents early, so I wasn't too concerned about what was going on. And then the next morning when we got up, I remember on our drive to the base, we drove by what at that time was Prince Gaddafi's palace. And I remember very well there being tanks and troops stationed around the palace. And then when we got to the base, they had taxied a jet up to the main gate. That was going to be their armament if anybody tried to crash the gate. So that was interesting. So we were evacuated for that. Spent 3 weeks in Madrid and Seville, Spain, came back to the States for 3 months at my grandparents' home. And then we went back to Tripoli, and when we went back, we had base housing there at Wheelus. And not a bad gig. You saw a photograph of me sitting next to the Mediterranean Sea. That was a 2-block walk from our house. So it's kind of a cool way to grow up. And then as things tend to happen in the Air Force and the other services, the next set of orders he got was for Maelstrom Air Force Base in Great Falls, Montana. So we literally went from being on the edge of the Sahara Desert to Great Falls, Montana. And in the 2 weeks prior to our arrival, the mercury did not get above 40 below. None of us even had coats at that point. So that was kind of a shock. I wouldn't trade growing up that way for anything in the world, to see the different cultures and to see those places and understand that the world's a little bigger than what's happening in central Arkansas is, I think, an advantage to the kids that grow up as military brats to have that understanding. I'm told that I was pretty fluent in Arabic when we were downtown. It's long since lost, except for a couple of phrases that would probably get me killed. I think it broadens your outlook on just about everything when you get to experience that.
By the early 70s, Kenneth was back in Des Arc, Arkansas, while his father was on his final tour with the U.S. Air Force, this time in Vietnam. The Calhoun patriarch kicked off civilian life, joining Kenneth's uncle at a boat factory in Delhi, Louisiana as the company's superintendent of transportation. It wasn't obvious at the time, but the seeds for Kenneth's career path were being planted.
Dad's Air Force career was all motor pool. He was a technician, very astute with the Allison transmission. There were a lot of them in service. So I guess I didn't venture too far. I think that if you'd have told me that when I was 15, 16, 17, I would have probably either swung on you or called you a liar. But I did kind of follow in Dad's footsteps.
Kenneth wouldn't characterize himself as much of a high school athlete outside of a serviceable stint as a 120 low hurdler, but he did show flashes of promise at speech competitions through the school's Future Farmers of America program. By 1979, high school was in the rearview, and Kenneth had returned to Arkansas the day after graduation, unsure of what his next step would be. What he did know was that he was done with school, or so he thought.
I was over school for a while. I had enough of that. So I worked on a cousin's farm for a while, and that was interesting. I remember the day that I decided that maybe education wasn't such a bad thing. In addition to the farm, my cousin had an irrigation business, so he'd put in underground pipe to water the crops around here. And we had a big project that we were working on, so he had gone into town and just picked up a couple of guys off the street. So I was down in the trench hooking pipe up. They were not very well acclimated to the job that we were doing, and the second pipe got kicked in and hit me and about took my legs out from under me. And then they were talking about how much he was paying them to come in and do this, which was more than me, the full-time employee. So that was enough. I enrolled in college. and said, we're going to have to find a better pathway than this.
Now, it would make a lot of sense for a guy like Kenneth, who is widely known for his passion for diesel technician training and education, to jump feet first into a diesel tech program. Except that's not what he did at all. Kenneth enrolled at Arkansas State University at Beebe and eyed an Associate of Arts degree with an emphasis on speech, a carryover from the FFA speech competitions that he was so good at in high school.
I think the first speech class that I took, the instructor graded on a scale from 1 to 5 and was notorious that you just didn't get a 5. And one of my assignments, I had started with a question, and if I remember right, the question was this: have you ever watched a child watching television? And for some reason that resonated with him, and I got the only 5 that was awarded for the semester for an intro. And that kind of started that. And I started hanging out in the speech department. Always been relatively decent with mechanical things and working with my hands, so I started building sets in the speech department. That led to a very brief and uncomfortable acting career in college. My biggest role was Macbeth.
Following a quick stop at then Northeast Louisiana University, Kenneth kick-started his career with Glasscock Convention Services, designing sets for things like stockholders meetings. And after a couple of years, he joined a local lighting specialist, again doing some commercial work. That company also supported musical acts, which saw him work with the likes of Kenny Rogers, the Oak Ridge Boys, and Alabama. But the weekend and after-hours nature of the work, coupled with the fact that he was the company's equipment rental manager during the regular work week, was more than Kenneth could take. So he left the show business in 1990 and dipped his toes into the world of trucking as a parts counterman for Harold Ives Trucking.
Junior year in high school, I worked in what George Arentz refers to as our two-room schoolhouse. So I was at a Texaco station that literally was that two-bay, old-fashioned full-service gas station. And so whether it was washing cars or fixing tires or doing oil changes, that was my summer job there. And then while I was going to school at NLU, my dad had moved on and had an Exxon station on the interstate. And so I would work for him on weekends and then in the summer when I was going to school. So there was a familiarity. It was a world that I understood and was comfortable in. I remember Dad had some service agreements with Tifton Aluminum, so there were always some cab over max at the Exxon station, and I would move them around or just do different things with them. Usually washing. Didn't get to do any real work on them, but again, it was familiar. And so landing at Harold Ives, it was a language that I already spoke, and it was more predictable. I worked second shift. I knew what my schedule was. I knew what days I was going to be off. And frankly, the money was as good or better than what I had just left, supposedly professionally doing what I was educated to do.
Kenneth found himself at Harold Ives tucked under the wing of the fleet's director of maintenance, Hank North, who served as a mentor throughout Kenneth's climb up the company's ranks. Kenneth has always been appreciative of the investment Hank North made in his professional development, but as Kenneth would soon find out, Mr. North might have overinvested.
But I got fired from Harold Ives. It's the only job I've ever been fired from. It's amusing to me now. It didn't seem that way at the time, but some of the company's senior drivers had figured out that my team on second shift was pretty efficient at what they did. And so they would pull in at the truck stop out on 40 and wait for the day shift to go home at 3 o'clock and then fall in on me. And they also weren't bashful about sharing that information with Harold Ives. And that kind of put me at odds with the first shift foreman, who also happened to be my boss. And so that and a couple of other things that annoyed him, and I got my walking papers and my severance pay. And what was really funny about it to me is about 2 weeks after that, he called me to tell me about an opening for a director of maintenance with another fleet. And I'm like, I was a foreman, you realize that, right? And so I don't know that it was necessarily me messing up as as much as it was me making him look bad that caused that parting of the ways.
While at Harold Ives, Kenneth had enrolled in training with Detroit Diesel, including early D-Deck troubleshooting, and he got certified for Series 60 overhaul. United Engines had Detroit Diesel distributorship rights for Arkansas, Oklahoma, and the northern half of Louisiana, and Kenneth joined the company in outside parts and service sales before being named parts manager a couple of years later, and eventually branch manager in Little Rock in 1997. Business was booming for Kenneth until 2000. That's when Daimler acquired Detroit Diesel from Roger Penske and turned United Engines' parts and service sales strategy on its head. United Engines itself was acquired by Frank Poole and Garth Bates a year later, and the three guys went to work reinventing the company's business plan. And then came 7:14 a.m., September 11th, 2001.
Because as disastrous as that was, I don't know that we would have survived without it. One of the things that happened as a result is that every police department, in every fire department, in every nursing home, suddenly was required to have standby power. Well, we had access to a line of generator sets, and so we were able to recover a lot of that lost revenue by getting heavy into not only selling generator sets, but then also the maintenance contracts to go along with them. And then in addition to that, they allowed me to purchase another building where we stood up a production line where we were building very rudimentary stripped down power generation units for the poultry industry, because they did not want all of the bells and whistles that you have to have if you're on a nursing home, for example. They just needed reliable electricity when the power went off, or all their chickens would die. And then we were also building power units for irrigation as well. We also went from a service department where we had 9 technicians on one shift to where we had 17 technicians on 2 shifts to try to survive vertical integration. A lot going on at that point in time, but these guys were amazing to work for. But I never will forget, one Saturday morning I'm sleeping in and my phone rings and I pick it up and it's my parts manager at that time. He said, "Kenneth, there's been a plane crash and Garth and Frank are gone." Both of the owners of the company had perished in that plane crash.
That crash was a dark time for Kenneth personally and professionally, as he recalls the priorities of the new management team didn't sync with his own, or those of Garth and Frank. While the end of Kenneth's tenure with United Engines was rather unspectacular, there were bright spots in his time there.
I hired my wife. Her sister had been in a prominent position at the corporate headquarters at United in Oklahoma City. So when Donetta graduated from college, then her sister asked me if I had any openings and would I be willing to interview her. And so, I basically hired my wife, and she'll appreciate this. As we began to work together, she pursued me. and United had a policy that wasn't going to fly, so I lost a good employee in order to gain a wife. She was managing all of the activity around our generator set sales, the salesman that was doing that work, and the service contracts, and she actually is pretty adept at speccing a generator for the job.
A business call in 2008 to then Truck Centers of Arkansas President Todd Havens would turn into a job offer and begin a 9-year stint at the family of dealerships. Kenneth was appointed President of Customer Relations, where he handled customer complaints. He was basically the dealership's bouncer. While at the dealership, Kenneth spun up a side business that waded into the oceans of telemetry data that trucks collect that at times really aren't all that helpful when it comes to making maintenance decisions. So he launched Romewood Maintenance Data Management. What Kenneth and his company had done is solve a basic and widespread issue plaguing telematic and diagnostic data in the early 2000s. Making intimidating volumes of data from those platforms digestible and actionable for fleets. Altec Industries took note and they acquired his company in 2017, and Kenneth now serves as their fleet optimization manager. He's also become a leading voice for vocational and technical education in the state of Arkansas, and he's among the loudest proponents of the trucking industry and its diesel technicians trade.
So Kenneth has always been a visionary. He's very invested, he's passionate, I feel like it's almost his calling to be, he's just compelled to empower others. He has an idea of what needs to be done, and I've heard him say on several occasions, if you are not part of the solution, you're part of the problem. If you're not part of the solution, you're part of the problem. And he has stood on this platform in every aspect, not only from workforce development, but through seeing the students and seeing the skills gap and seeing that the perception of our industry, diesel techs especially, from a different generation, and how that needs to be embraced and how much it's changed.
And when I was first elected to the Senate, I established two things. One is I established a career and workforce development board that had 13 industry sector people on it, and Kenneth was one of those people. I had known him a little bit before that, as I had a workforce task force on the future of workforce, and Kenneth was part of that task force. So he's not a real loud person. He's not one of those people that is, out front all the time being loud, very quiet, but he always had some good thoughts and very good ideas about where we needed to be. And he really introduced me to the transportation industry, to the trucking industry. And he was able to pull in trucking companies because they all see the need for a better educated and skilled workforce in the transportation industry.
Kenneth's leadership and accomplishments in the industry are literally too long to list, but some of the highlights include Chairman of the Arkansas Trucking Association's Maintenance and Technology Council, TMC General Chairman and Treasurer. He chairs the Program Advisory Committee for the Diesel Technology Program for Arkansas State University BB's Searcy campus, and he established the Apprenticeship Standards Committee within TMC. He's also a member of the Be Pro, Be Proud Foundation Board of Directors, a vocational and skilled trade education initiative that was born in Arkansas and since spread to 5 other states. In Arkansas alone, Be Pro, Be Proud has impacted nearly 40,000 students across 16 training programs. And Kenneth, along with Maverick Transportation Vice President of Maintenance Mike Jeffress, helped establish the Arkansas Trucking Association's Carl Tapp Technician Scholarship Program, which has awarded 10 scholarships of $7,500 each from 2017 to 2022 for students seeking to become diesel technicians.
The Carl Tapp Memorial Scholarship is an outstanding program. Myself, I have 3 recipients of that scholarship that have become great employees and entered the industry with funding developed by Kenneth and that committee. I think of things like Be Pro, Be Proud, that's really hitting our high schools and getting interest in this industry and all the great benefits it has. I know without a doubt that those things don't happen without Kenneth.
He also co-created and spearheaded with Mike Jeffress the Arkansas Trucking Association's Maintenance and Technology Council Technician Curriculum Advisory Committee. Part of that organization's charge is to audit the technical education processes offered by schools to ensure students leave those programs employable.
In 2019, I believe, we set up some legislation. I did some legislation. It's always about workforce. And we did with the State Chamber of Commerce and with Kenneth about the need to do audits for our programs at the 2-year colleges, because a lot of times people come out of those colleges and they think they have the skills and they don't have them at all. And one of them happened to be diesel technology. So Kenneth and a group of folks from his industry surveyed all of the 2-year colleges here in the state and their diesel technology programs.
And man, what we found, not only do the places look disgusting, you can't walk safely from one side of the shop to the other. The equipment that they're training on has not been in production for decades. It's a disorganized mess. And when you get the information on their budget, they have no money. It's like, yeah, now I know why we've given up and we were trying to all grow our own. But that can't stand. We can't do that and expect our businesses to be successful.
2 schools in the state ended up being almost there, and he worked very closely with both of those schools to bring their industry certifications and their equipment, the curriculum, all of those things up to industry standards.
We did our audits, we made recommendations for what the schools needed to work on to meet our needs, because one of the things I like to do, I pose this question when I go into a school for the first time. I'll say, who's your customer? And the answer I typically get is, well, the student, of course. And my response to that is, well, in that case, what's your product? And then that's an oh moment. I said, now you get it. I'm your customer. I'm going to hire your product. And so you need to understand what our businesses look like and what we actually do. And this isn't it. You teaching overhaul on N14 engines that have been out of production for as long as they have and don't have any systems that remotely resemble what we have to deal with today to meet the standards that the EPA puts on us and the technology that, frankly, the OEs have used to build a better mousetrap. And you've created an expectation for these students that they're going to be out overhauling engines. We don't do that typically at the dealership level. It's so much more cost effective and a catastrophic failure to swing an engine with a factory remanufactured engine that has a warranty, and by the time you do the cost comparison of what the labor is for an overhaul and you factor in the warranty and the fact that you're getting something that you know the quality is there and somebody's standing behind it, it's a no-brainer, and we just don't do that anymore. So what you're teaching doesn't make sense, and what you're teaching it on is ridiculous.
That was invaluable. And now there are other schools across the state who understand where they were not and how they were lacking, and they are beginning to try and upgrade their systems and their facilities so that they can meet the industry standards.
Despite all the accolades and accomplishments that an entrepreneur with a degree in speech could possibly pile up in a career in transportation, including a Silver Spark Plug in 2013 and a Peggy Fisher Study Group Leadership Award, it's incredibly likely that Kenneth Calhoun will be remembered best for his passion for vocational and trade education.
Oh, I would absolutely be honored if that was what I was remembered for. If you look at the era that I grew up in. So I had access to industrial arts, I had access to the ag program in FFA. My senior year in high school, I actually went to school half a day and worked on a farm half a day. Those opportunities just weren't there in the educational system anymore. We had let those things basically just atrophy and die. So what can we do about that, and how do we make a difference that's meaningful? The cavalry isn't coming. Nobody is going to come and solve industry's problems for industry. It's up to us. We've got to be active, and we've got to make noise. We've got to let the educational system know. We've got to let state government know. What we do is, not a dirty job. It can be, but it certainly can be otherwise as well. And it's also not just a job. It's a career path that I consider myself one of the luckiest people in the world that it's afforded me the life and the lifestyle that I've had. In terms of having an impact on maintenance, I'll borrow from Randy Obermeyer and his root cause analysis. If we're struggling to maintain our equipment, what's the root cause? And that's what I'm working on.